Madam Speaker, I rise to speak on the subject of the scourge of poker machines in pubs and clubs in Tasmania, and to acknowledge up front that there
Do we need a vote?
Yes, we certainly will. That there are 11 people who are employed at the Glenorchy RSL who are now unemployed. To acknowledge that there are veterans who have long valued the service provided by
Mr.
the Glenorchy
Bacon,
RSL,
I'm struggling to hear
who will no longer have the Glenorchy RSL as a place to gather, to be together as veterans who fought and served this country. Madam Speaker, the notice of motion that we're debating today, 1, notes that during the 2018 state election campaign, Liberal MPs and candidates, including the Premier, Honourable Will Hodgman MP, and Treasurer, Honourable Peter Gutwin MP, stood outside the Glenorchy RSL and falsely claimed that without poker machines the venue would close, threatening Anzac Day celebrations. 2, further notes with sadness the unexpected closure of the Glenorchy RSL on Sunday the 21st of July 2019, the loss of 11 local jobs and a service highly valued by Glenorchy veterans. 3, agrees the Tasmanian Liberal Party, the Premier, Treasurer and Liberal candidates perpetrated a lie on the Tasmanian people in the lead up to the state election on behalf of their gambling industry donors. 4, calls on the Premier on behalf of the Liberal Party and its elected representatives to apologise to A, veterans and staff from the now closed Glenorchy RSL for shamelessly exploiting them for political gain, and B, Tasmanian voters for misleading them on the impact of removing poker machines from pubs and clubs. 5, further agrees that poker machines should be removed from pubs and clubs. Now, Madam Speaker, we have brought this matter on for debate in the wake of the closure of the Glenorchy RSL. And for any member who's forgotten what a shameful episode the Glenorchy RSL was, I refer them to ABC Online, a story that was published on the 9th of January last year, which has a serried array of Liberal ministers, sitting members and candidates. I can see in the background of this photo outside the Glenorchy RSL Mr Yench, Ms Archer, Ms Howlett, Mr Barakis in the back there, Mr Brooks, there's Mr Gutwin, the Treasurer, there's the Premier, and there in the background I think are some of the 11 staff who are no longer employed at the Glenorchy RSL. Now, Madam Speaker, the Tasmanian people in the last state election campaign were fed one of the most massive lies that has ever been perpetrated on the electorate. They were knowingly, willfully misled by the Liberal Party about the economic and social impact of the removal of poker machines from pubs and clubs. And all of that was done on behalf of the gambling industry on the mainland and interstate, who, as we know, Madam Speaker, poured millions of dollars into ensuring a Liberal election win. And that, of course, Madam Speaker, will leave a stain forever on the collective soul of the Liberal Party of Tasmania and every member who was elected to this place off the back of that blood money, Madam Speaker. And it is blood money, Madam Speaker. It comes out of the pockets of some of our poorest people. Poker machine addiction leads to family violence and breakdown, child abuse and neglect, addiction, mental illness, homelessness, abject poverty, Madam Speaker. That is the social reality of having poker machines in pubs and clubs, Madam Speaker, even acknowledged within the government's own social and economic impact statement on the impact of poker machines in Tasmania. And as we know, Madam Speaker, poker machine addiction, a person losing everything they have on the poker machines, has led to suicide. Madam Speaker, you can't get away from that fact. Now, Madam Speaker, the Premier and the Treasurer, if they were decent and honest, in the wake of the closure of the Glenorchy RSL, would apologise to the staff and to the veterans, and they would apologise to the people of Tasmania. It was a massive massive lie, Madam Speaker, and it was a shameless exploitation of our veterans, Madam Speaker. Shameless. We were even led to believe that there'd be a threat to Anzac Day celebrations if poker machines were removed from the Glenorchy RSL. Now, Madam Speaker, Glenorchy RSL kept its poker machines and it closed anyway. Madam Speaker, so we want the people of Tasmania to receive an apology from the Premier, and we want the people of Tasmania to see where each of the major party stands on this issue. Now, we know where the Liberals stand. We know that very clearly. They've barely wavered from their socially and economically reckless and toxic policy, which will embed the harm caused by poker machines out to the year 2043 as a result of bending over to the gambling industry and instituting, as they will when legislation comes before the Parliament next year, the individual licensing model. Madam Speaker, the very model that my colleague, the member for Clark, Mr Bacon, raised during the campaign when he stood there with the former Gaming Commissioner, Peter Holt, who was very, very clear, Madam Speaker, that the individual licensing model will only entrench harms. It is one thing for a Parliament to strike down the deed or allow the deed to lapse. It is quite another for a Parliament to enact a policy which means that every single one of the venues in Tasmania will be individually licensed to continue the harm caused by poker machines, Madam Speaker. And we will hear, and in fact we have heard from the Labor leader, statements about sovereign risk, about the fact that Labor didn't win the election, therefore they've walked away from their pokies policy, Madam Speaker. Well, Madam Speaker, here are some of the things that the leader of the Labor Party said about poker machines and Labor's principled position in the lead up to the last state election. Labor leader Rebecca White said Mr Hodgman had, quote, rolled over to the pro-pokies lobby group. Well, that's exactly what Ms White has done since. She said at the time, again, the story dated the 9th of January last year, the infamous Glenorchy RSL conga line of Liberal MPs and candidates. She said on that day in this media report, today Premier Will Hodgman has shown he's nothing more than a coward, can't stand up to the pro-pokies lobby group, she said. What he is proposing to do is burden the Tasmanian community with poker machines until 2043. The Labor leader went on to say, I will be 60 years old before we can have this debate again about removing poker machines from our pubs and clubs if we do not take the chance right now to do what is right. Parliament, Madam Speaker, is sovereign, and Parliament will be given an opportunity to do what is right when the Treasurer brings legislation into this place to give effect to the Liberals' damaging, socially and economically destructive policy. Now, we know what happened to Ms White. We know that Rebecca White got rolled by the O'Byrnes, the Federal Labor Party and the gambling industry, which underwrites it through poker machines in clubs, Madam Speaker. That's exactly what happened to Ms White. And in fact, Ms White, it was a mortal blow to your leadership. I think it is only a matter of time. You cannot take a policy of that substance to the state election, make the statements that you have, and then in just over a year after that election result, crab walk away from it. You can't. I believe that it is terminal to your leadership, and I'm quite sad about that, to be honest, because having David O'Byrne as opposition leader gives me no joy at all. So, Madam Speaker, we also had Ms White the day after the state election saying, I know that the Labor Party's position is not going to change on this. We remain firm on our view that poker machines should be restricted to casinos. Absolutely, Madam Speaker. That's good policy. That is socially responsible policy. And it's economically responsible policy, of course, because if even a fraction of the $200 million or so that Tasmanians lose each year into the poker machines went into small businesses, we know it would give them a substantial economic lift. In fact, that was a point that was made by Ms White and other Labor members in the lead up to the state election. On the 20th of June last year, the Tasmanian Labor Party, Ms White said, remains firmly committed to the policy position we took to the last election. On September the 8th last year, Labor recognises that poker machines are the source of so much pain and poverty in our community. Quite simply, it was and still is the right thing to do. Absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I think it is a tragedy for the socially and economically disadvantaged people of Tasmania and those who are at risk of gambling addiction that Ms White got rolled. It is a tragedy because we have an opportunity in this very finely balanced parliament, Madam Speaker, to do the right thing when the legislation comes before this place next year. Now, on the 8th of February this year, not even a full year after the state election, on ABC's Leon Compton Mornings program, Ms White said, "We didn't win the election. It's taken me a while to reconcile that fact as well, Leon. But the fact of the matter is that we can't give effect to our policy because it was a point in time." I remember listening to that on the radio, Madam Speaker, and my heart sinking.
Yeah.
So cowardly. Which was the point I was making, she goes on to say, about the campaign that we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity here to remove poker machines from pubs and clubs if we alter the deed and give effect to that. We didn't win. We can't do that.
So
No, Madam Speaker. No, Madam Speaker, that is not true. The Labor Party took a policy and a position of principle to the election. People voted for them on the basis of that policy. And less than a year after the election, Labor has absolutely dumped its policy. The O'Byrnes won, Madam Speaker, and Ms White lost. And that is really, really sad for the people of Tasmania, Madam Speaker. So we want to hear from other members in this place what their position is. We want to remind Tasmanians where each party stands on this issue. We never want to see another election campaign like the last one where powerful, dark, vested interests bought an election. We never want to see Tasmanian voters misled to the extent that they were ever again, Madam Speaker. Now, the only way you can absolutely guarantee that, of course, is to have electoral reform and donations reform in Tasmania, and we await with great interest the Attorney General's delivery of some form of electoral reform, Madam Speaker. But as it is now, what happened was that the gambling industry won an election and then they won over the opposition. So the gambling industry won twice, Madam Speaker. What a great return on investment. Not only did they get to buy an election, but not long after the election, the Tasmanian Hospitality Association received an extra $4.8 million in funding. Return on investment. Thank you for a favour done, says the Treasurer. Now, Madam Speaker, by any definition, that's institutional corruption. It is. You had a vested interest buying an election. The money was not disclosed, the vast majority of it, much of it was in kind, Madam Speaker, and then after the election, further corrupting the democratic process by destroying an opposition leader, undermining a policy position which was sound, and ensuring that you've got a tame Labor Party in this place when the legislation is brought before the House by the Treasurer, Madam Speaker. Now, I don't know if anyone's been watching federal politics lately, but it's equally depressing. You've got a federal Liberal government, LNP government, that basically took no policy to the election except for massive tax cuts that will benefit the rich. And you've got a federal Labor opposition under Anthony Albanese who has told his caucus to brace itself to vote for more government legislation, who came in on the first week back, Madam Speaker, and cut the guts out of Australia's progressive taxation system.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It was just... I come from an old Labor family, Madam Speaker. My dad died in the war. He worked for Gough Whitlam. He was so proud to be Labor, Madam Speaker. He wouldn't, my late father, would not recognise the Labor Party of today. And regrettably, what's happened inside the groupthink of Labor federally is that they've decided, rather than be brave and take good policy and put it before the people at election time, they'll be quislings, small targets, fly under the radar. I guess
revisionism.
Absolutely. And at some level, obviously, a decision's been made by the faceless men within the Labor Party and Anthony Albanese that if we just vote with the government, we'll let them hang themselves. Madam Speaker.
Never worked for them before.
No, it's never worked for them before, and there's a hunger in the electorate right now for real leadership. There's an almost desperate need amongst many Australians, Madam Speaker, to have their faith in politics and democracy restored by being certain that when you vote for a party, that they'll stand by the policies they put before you when they went to an election, Madam Speaker. It's... I feel very sad for civil society. I feel really sad for the kids who gathered outside Parliament now twice to strike for climate, that you've got the two major parties in Australia who are almost indistinguishable these days. I mean, the Labor Party of today has turned into a neoliberal party, Madam Speaker. The light on the hill's been snuffed out. And Labor should be held to account for that. Absolutely, it should be. And what happened here, Madam Speaker, is a betrayal of people who, following their disbelief that Labor had taken a position of principle on poker machines, entrusted their vote with Labor members on the basis of that position of principle.
Because they were desperate.
They were desperate
to get some action on gambling.
They were just desperate for some decency in politics, really. And for that brief moment, we had it. We had an opportunity. Now, Madam Speaker, the fact of the matter is, the Treasurer, if he has the courage to come in here and talk on this, and the Leader of the Opposition are members of the Tasmanian Parliament and should appreciate that Parliament is sovereign. We have legal advice from Professor Michael Stokes about the deed, which basically is very, very clear. And this is legal advice that was provided to the former Greens Leader, Peg Putt, following the 2003 institutionally corrupt extension of the federal monopoly deed. And Michael Stokes' opinion is, and the question that was put to him by Ms Putt was, could he please provide an opinion on the power of the Parliament to amend the deed between the Government of Tasmania and Federal Hotels and others of the 25th of October 1993, incorporated in the Gaming Control Act as Schedule 1. And the Schedule 1 of the Gaming Control Act, Madam Speaker, is the deed itself. Summary of Mr Stokes' advice is, 1, there is no limit to the power of the Tasmanian Parliament to amend or repeal the deed to enact legislation which is inconsistent with it. 2, the government will not be liable in damages or in any other remedy to federal hotels or the parties to the deed if the Parliament amends or repeals the deed. And that, Madam Speaker, is because Parliament is sovereign. The deed was an agreement between the Tasmanian government, that is the executive, and the federal group. The deed was not an agreement between the Parliament of Tasmania and the Farrell family. It was not. Parliament has always the power, and no previous Parliament can fetter the powers of any future parliament. And the fact is, Madam Speaker, that if Labor would stick to its policy and vote the way it told Tasmanians it would vote at the last state election, there would be absolutely zero sovereign risk argument on the part of federal hotels, because that policy intent would have been flagged by Labor. That should they win the next election, they will give effect to their policy. Madam Speaker, the sovereign risk argument is rubbish, Madam Speaker. And in fact, it undermines the supremacy of this parliament, Madam Speaker. We make the laws, Madam Speaker. We drive policy development here in the House of Assembly, Madam Speaker. It is Parliament that has the power to deal with the deed and to save who knows how many Tasmanians now and in the future from a life of misery, poverty, heartache, Madam Speaker. We actually have the power in here to do that. And it is an abrogation of Labor's responsibility to hold to a policy that was sound, that would have saved lives, Madam Speaker. Now, the stain will forever be on the souls of the Liberal Party, but the Labor Party, it has stained itself as well, Madam Speaker. And it's very, very quiet over there, aren't they, Madam Speaker? Very, very quiet. And so you should be. Hang your heads in shame, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, obviously, as I said, we'll be calling for a vote. I'll just reflect on the previous debate that we had about the health system in Tasmania, remind all members that gambling addiction is a health issue. Mental illness caused by gambling addiction is a health issue. Children who experience neglect and or abuse as a result of their parents' addiction will become a health issue, Madam Speaker. Poverty is a health issue, Madam Speaker, because if people are so poor, they can't go to the doctor when they need to or get their teeth fixed when they need to get them fixed, Madam Speaker, they will end up in our health system. It places a burden on our health system, Madam Speaker. All this lip service, Madam Speaker, about health being Labor's #1 priority. Spare me. Spare me, Madam Speaker. So I look forward to the contributions from whichever government member is going to get up. Oh, is that right, Mr Barnett? You're going to get up here. I don't think I saw you in that photo at the Glenorchy RSL, but I'll bet London to a brick you were there, weren't you? A loyal Liberal cheerleader standing outside the...
I was there.
Thank you for confirming that, Mr Shelton. All of you standing outside the Glenorchy RSL, cheering on the gambling industry, lying to the people of Tasmania, lying to the staff at the Glenorchy RSL.
Listening to the staff.
Madam Speaker. What was that?
Listening to the staff.
By interjection, Mr Shelton says that when the Liberal leadership team and candidates stood outside the Glenorchy RSL and falsely claimed that the removal of poker machines would lead to the closure of the Glenorchy RSL, they were listening to staff. They weren't listening to staff. Staff can't donate tens of millions of dollars to your re-election campaign. You were listening to your gambling industry donors. There are 11 people now in the northern suburbs who until 2 weeks ago, Madam Speaker, were employed at the Glenorchy RSL. Haven't heard a single expression of sorrow, condolence towards those 11 staff who were mercilessly exploited and used in the lead up to the state election,
really
to the enduring shame
That's right.
of the Premier, the Treasurer and the Liberal colleagues, and now that shame sits squarely on Labor's shoulders, Madam Speaker. Now, we're going to hear some stuff about harm minimisation soon. We're going to hear some weasel words, I think, about, why if we didn't win the election we can't give effect to our policy, Madam Speaker. But it will just be that, Madam Speaker. It will just be weasel words. Because the facts are the facts are the facts, Madam Speaker. Labor misled the electorate. and then Labor rolled over to the gambling industry, Madam Speaker.